Probably 25 or 30 years ago, ABA and positive behavior support grew out of applied behavior analysis. And I discussed the fact that at that point there was what we might call a messy divorce. There were some differences between the fields at that point. One of those differences being commitment to a philosophy of non-aversive treatment, which was the main reason that positive behavior support arose, but also some differences with regard to kind of the methodology that you can use and more inclusive of different sciences and different approaches in a PBS world. Also a commitment to inclusion of individuals with disabilities within typical home, community, and school settings, and that wasn't always the case with applied behavior analysis. In fact, several years ago I heard an old-time ABA person talk about the good old days of being able to work in an institution because they could do anything they wanted to in research. That's kind of what we fought against, was that approach. I do believe that over the last several years we've had a lot of reconciliation. It's like, okay, you've started dating and now you're going to remarry your prior spouse. I think there's a lot of growth that's occurred on both sides, but particularly in the applied behavior analysis world, they're much more valuing of a philosophy of inclusion. They look at broader perspectives and different methodologies and different sciences that can address the needs of individuals. They also take more of a systems approach now than they have in the past, and also have a commitment to understanding that we can, through the technology we've develop very effective strategies and interventions for individuals with challenging behavior. In a recent journal, Rose Ivanone and I did a presentation or a piece about positive behavior support, but really looking at Tier 3, which is intensive behavioral supports for students, and looking how it's applied within a school setting. We addressed some of the myths that we've run into in working in schools. Those are actually some of the same myths that happen in community settings and with adults too. One of those is that PBS is simply about checking off the box. It's compliance. If we do A through F, we'll be good. And we kind of want to make sure that folks realize that there is a science here and there is a process you go through. Now, it's good to have checklists and it's good to have forms, and I'll share those with people at any time, very effective processes that work. But it's also important to have something more than that. So part of that is also an understanding of a multi-tiered system of support. And in a multi-tiered system, Tier 3 is really intensive supports for students. We have a lot of schools and a lot of personnel say, well, we don't have Tier 1 and Tier 2 in place, so we can't do Tier 3. We have to let folks understand that Tier 3 is absolutely a necessity. You have to do it even if you don't have Tier 1 and Tier 2 in place. You cannot have students with very, very challenging behavior. So you really are, it behooves the school district or parents or even adult providers, providers for adult systems, to make sure they have a multi-tiered system in place and they're doing all three concurrently. PBS is not about a list of strategies. It's not give me something to do, give me that list of strategies. It's about matching those strategies to the quality of life outcomes you want to pursue and the environment of the student. And so you can't do that without really understanding why the behavior is occurring and matching that to the context of that individual's life. And then I think the final myth is that there has to be something with regard to who can do FBAs and BIPs. So there's two myths there. One is everyone should be able to do a functional behavior assessment and a behavior intervention plan. No, not everybody needs to have all those skill sets. But on the other extreme, we also don't have to say it's relegated only to a certain group of people. It can only be behavior analysts or school psychologists that can do those. There are lots of people that can learn those skills, and so doesn't need to be restricted to one profession. Well, I've had a couple of mentors that have been very important to me. One of those is Glenn Dunlap. Many years ago, I was in West Virginia. He went from West Virginia to the University of South Florida, and he recruited me to come to Florida. I'd had all the winter I could take in West Virginia, so I moved to Florida, where it's been wonderful. But he was my first mentor, and that was at 40 years of age. Until that point, I was basically the only behavior analyst in that small state of West Virginia that worked in the field, worked in communities and homes and schools. And when I began working with Glenn, I learned how to do it within those settings and to do it with a lot of very effectively, but also how to do it in a very humane and positive way, and working at greater systems levels. He's been my mentor for over 20 years. And then Rob Horner and George Sagai for the last 20 years, beginning to extend that work with individuals to school-based settings. The amazing work they've done in doing that with thousands and thousands of schools in the United States and across the world has been the most fun I've had as a professional, and I enjoy it every year and every day. Well, I can give a couple of success stories about PBS. I could tell about a school that's completely turned around from the school that no one wanted to attend, even the teachers, to being the target of everyone wanting to attend, from students to teachers to parents. I could talk about an individual who went from an institution to being able to, through positive behavior support, move out of that institution, live at his own home, with his own best friend, travel all over the United States, doing presentations on that transition, and doing all of that with very little speech. But his story was so powerful, it resonated with everyone. But I think my favorite one was many years ago. There was a little 4-year-old boy that had been diagnosed with autism. And he was transitioning from preschool to kindergarten, and the school was very reluctant to allow him to attend, unless the families did lots of things to make that possible. So we formed a team. The team was very good at identifying PBS philosophy and understanding what to do. And they supported that child for several years as he transitioned to elementary school. Now, I left that setting 15 years ago, but a couple years ago I got a note in the mail, and that note was the clipping of a story about him graduating from college with honors. And those are the kind of things that just make you realize those initial PBS efforts were what made that possible and changed the course of that student's life.